Why is it that the West, with all its technological achievements and philosophical traditions, keeps looking east, fascinated by the mysteries of Tibet? Perhaps it is because Tibet is not just a distant country on a map. It is a symbol, a mirror held up to our restless hearts, reflecting something we have forgotten. High in the Himalayas, Tibet whispers of something beyond the noise of modern life. The snow-covered peaks and wind-swept monasteries stand not as monuments to wealth or empire, but to silence, contemplation, and the pursuit of the eternal. In a world obsessed with consumption and ambition, Tibet represents a radical reversal, the quest to let go. The fascination with Tibetan mysticism is not just a spiritual trend. It is a longing buried deep in the Western psyche, a longing for connection, for unity, for meaning beyond materialism. But what exactly are we drawn to? It is not just the colorful prayer flags or the chanting of monks in hidden temples. It is the philosophy behind those images. A wisdom that sees reality not as a battle between separate egos, but as a dance of interbeing, a cosmic web where all things arise and dissolve in unity. Helena Blavatsky, the controversial founder of the Theosophical movement, understood this longing. In the 19th century, when reaching Tibet meant crossing impossible mountains and borders, she made the journey. She sought out the hidden teachers of the East. What she brought back was not just stories or artifacts. She brought back the voice of the silence, fragments of the golden precepts, a secret text once reserved only for Tibetan initiates, now shared with the West. For years, scholars debated whether Blavatsky invented her sources, but today references in Tibetan canons like the Kanjur and Tanjur and testimonies from high lamas have confirmed she had accessed something real, profound, and ancient. And yet, even now, the true meaning of these teachings remains elusive. Why? Because Tibetan wisdom is not intellectual. It is not something you can master or summarize. It is something that transforms you, or it remains locked. The Tibet that calls to us is not only the political land now under Chinese rule. It is a symbolic Tibet, the embodiment of the human longing for transcendence. For centuries, Tibet was isolated, surrounded by some of the harshest conditions on earth. This isolation became spiritual. Its teachings were hidden behind layers of myth, metaphor, and paradox. To the Western mind, trained in logic and material causality, Tibetan philosophy can seem frustrating, even nonsensical. But to the mystic, it is music, strange and otherworldly, dissonant yet beautiful. At the heart of this mysticism is the idea of non-separateness, the insight that all things are one, not just poetically, but truly. To approach this truth, the seeker must walk a path of paradox. To see, one must first go blind to illusion. To understand, one must unlearn. To awaken, one must die to the ego. This is the path Blavatsky walked. She was told she could not carry the sacred texts out of Tibet, only memory. And so she memorized the verses, 37 out of 90, and shared them as the voice of the silence. What is astonishing is that these verses carry a universal weight. They echo what we find in Christian mysticism, in Indian Advaita, in Mahayana Buddhism, and in Neoplatonism. They speak of the journey from multiplicity to unity, from identification with form to realization of essence. But why does this matter to us now? Because our age is marked by a profound forgetting. We have forgotten who we are. We identify with our roles, our bodies, our social media profiles, our anxieties, our ambitions. We run faster, think harder, consume more. But the hunger only grows. Tibetan mysticism offers not an escape, but a mirror. It shows us that our suffering is not because life is flawed, but because our perception is flawed. We are caught in the heresy of separateness, the belief that I am over here, you are over there, and between us is emptiness. This is not just a metaphysical error, it is the root of violence, greed, and despair. When Blavatsky shared the voice of the silence, she was not offering another book or ideology. She was offering a practice, a path of transformation. It is a path that begins with the recognition that the world out there is a dream, that the ego in here is a dream, and that beyond both lies something vast, silent, and luminous. But this path is not easy. It demands the death of the old self. It demands letting go of false securities. It demands a shift from asking, "What can I take?" to "How can I serve?" The Voice of the Silence is not a book you read. It is a book you become. As we begin this journey, let us remember, Tibet is not just a land. Blavatsky is not just a figure of history. And the golden precepts are not just ancient words. They are invitations, timeless, urgent, alive. They are the echo of a voice that calls us to the silence within, to the still point beyond name and form where we remember, we are not separate. We have never been separate. We are one. To understand the power of the Voice of the Silence, we must first understand the woman who carried it across mountains, cultures, and centuries. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky was born in 1831 in what is now Ukraine, into Russian nobility. But unlike the children of her social class, Blavatsky was not content with aristocratic life. From a young age, she was fascinated by the unknown, the mystical, the spiritual. She claimed that as a child, she had visions, dreams, and a restless desire to understand the nature of life and death. This desire drove her to abandon the comforts of her world and embark on a lifelong quest across continents. In an era when women were expected to stay home, marry, and raise children, Blavatsky became a traveler, a seeker, and eventually, a revolutionary thinker. She journeyed across Europe, the Middle East, India, and finally Tibet, a place that in the 19th century was nearly impossible for a European to reach. But she was not just a tourist. Blavatsky sought something more. Contact with the hidden keepers of wisdom, the Mahatmas or masters, who she believed held the keys to the universe's deepest mysteries. According to her own accounts and the records of the theosophical movement she later founded, Blavatsky spent several years in Tibet, particularly in the remote region of Shigatse, at the Tashilhunpo monastery. There, under the guidance of lamas and masters, she studied texts that were never meant for outsiders. One of these was the Book of the Golden Precepts. The Book of the Golden Precepts was not a public scripture. It was not available in bookstores or even in the outer libraries of monasteries. It was an inner document, part of the esoteric teachings transmitted only to advanced initiates, written on ancient palm leaf manuscripts, handled with reverence and surrounded by secrecy. Blavatsky was told that she could not take the physical texts with her. What she could do, however, was memorize what she could, carry it in her mind, and transmit it in the West. This is how the Voice of the Silence was born, as a collection of 37 verses out of 90, distilled from the Golden Precepts. For decades, critics dismissed Blavatsky as a fraud. How could a Russian woman, without formal academic training, gain access to secret Tibetan teachings? How could she possibly have crossed such cultural and geographical barriers? But time has a way of revealing what controversy conceals. Today, Tibetan canons like the Kanjur and Tanjur, respected by Buddhist scholars, reference the same golden precepts. High-ranking lamas have acknowledged the authenticity of the teachings Blavatsky brought, and the resonance of her words with Tibetan Buddhist thought is undeniable. Blavatsky was not merely translating foreign ideas. She was transmitting a spiritual lineage. But what makes the Voice of the Silence so powerful is not just its mysterious origin. It is its message. The verses she carried are not instructions for rituals or codes of belief. They are guideposts for the soul, markers on the path from ignorance to awakening. They speak of the journey every human undertakes, consciously or not. The journey from outer distractions to inner stillness, from selfish craving to universal compassion, from the illusion of separateness to the realization of unity. In this sense, Blavatsky's work is not just Tibetan, it is universal. She herself emphasized that the wisdom of the Golden Precepts was echoed across the ancient world. In the mystical traditions of Egypt, in the Orphic mysteries of Greece, in the teachings of the Upanishads in India, we find the same essential pattern. First, the awakening to the existence of something greater, the symbolic stage, where myths and symbols awaken the human sense of the sacred. Second, the inward turn, the philosophical stage where one seeks to understand the divine not only as something out there, but also within. Third, the dissolution of boundaries, the initiatic stage, where the seeker becomes one with the whole, transcending all duality. Blavatsky was aware of this universality. She saw herself not as an inventor of a new religion, but as a transmitter of an ancient, timeless wisdom. She often emphasized that true spirituality is not about adopting exotic customs or external labels. It is about awakening the deep, universal truths that lie buried within every human heart. This is why the voice of the silence speaks to readers across cultures and centuries. The language is symbolic. The images are poetic, but the message cuts straight to the core. It tells us that the root of suffering is the illusion of separateness. It tells us that the goal of the spiritual path is not personal success or salvation, but the realization of unity with all life. And it tells us that the way to this realization is not through retreating from the world, but through engaging with it from a place of compassion, humility, and wisdom. Blavatsky herself lived this paradox. She was a fiery, controversial figure, criticized, misunderstood, admired, and attacked in equal measure. She was not a perfect human being. She was often described as temperamental, impatient, and fiercely independent. But perhaps it was precisely this imperfect, passionate humanity that allowed her to transmit the teachings in a way that was alive. She was not trying to be a saint. She was trying to wake people up, and this ultimately is what makes the voice of the silence so relevant today. We live in an age of unprecedented knowledge, unprecedented connection, and yet unprecedented fragmentation. We know more, but we understand less. We communicate faster, but we connect less deeply. We have more, but we feel emptier. Blavatsky's message cuts through this noise with brutal clarity. If you want to understand life, stop looking outward and start looking inward. If you want to heal the world, start by healing the illusion of separation within yourself. If you want to awaken, be prepared to die. Not physically, but to the false self, the small self, the ego that clings, craves, and fears. The voice of the silence is not an easy text. It challenges us. It demands that we give up our most cherished illusions. It invites us to a humility that is not self-abasement, but an honest recognition of our place in the vast web of life. And it points us toward a compassion that is not mere sentiment, but the very fabric of reality. Blavatsky called this the law of laws, compassion, not as an emotion but as a cosmic principle. To live in harmony with this principle is to live in alignment with the deepest order of the universe. To ignore it is to remain trapped in the dream of separateness. As we explore these teachings, let us remember that Blavatsky did not bring them as an academic or an outsider. She brought them as someone who had walked into the heart of the mystery, who had sat at the feet of masters, who had risked everything to bring back a light she believed could help awaken the world. And now, more than a century later, that light is still burning. It waits for those who are ready to walk the path, to listen not just with the mind, but with the heart, to hear not just the words, but the silence beneath them, to become, in the deepest sense, the voice of the silence. What does it mean to awaken? This question has echoed through every culture, every tradition, and every age. And though the languages and symbols change, the pattern remains hauntingly familiar. In the voice of the silence, the path of awakening is described not as a sudden event, but as a gradual ascent, a journey through stages, or what Tibetan mysticism calls the three halls: the hall of ignorance, the hall of learning, and the hall of wisdom. This structure is not unique to Tibet. In ancient Egypt, in the mysteries of Greece, in the sacred texts of India, we find the same idea, that the human soul ascends through layers of understanding, breaking through illusions and attachments, until it reaches the heart of reality. Let us explore these three stages not as distant concepts, but as living experiences unfolding within each of us. The first stage is the hall of ignorance. Here, the human being is caught in the grip of survival. Life is centered on material concerns: food, comfort, status, pleasure, power. The mind, though powerful, is enslaved to the instincts. Intelligence is used not for truth or wisdom, but for cunning, ambition, and self-preservation. It is a stage of fragmentation. The world is seen as a battlefield. Others are competitors or threats. Nature is a resource to be exploited. Life is a struggle to win, to accumulate, to dominate. But beneath this restless drive is a profound emptiness, an echoing sense that something is missing, something no amount of wealth or success can fill. The voice of the silence describes this stage as a realm where the fires of desire burn brightly, where the self is intoxicated with its own importance, where the light we mistake for the sun is only the flickering glow of passing pleasures. Yet even here, a longing stirs. A moment comes when the seeker senses the limits of this world. When success tastes hollow, when pleasures fade quickly, when the heart whispers that there must be more. This is the first crack in the illusion. The second stage is the hall of learning. Here the seeker turns inward. No longer satisfied with surface existence, they begin to ask deeper questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the meaning of life and death? The mind awakens to the possibility of knowledge. The seeker reads, studies, reflects, meditates. They begin to see patterns, connections, truths that were hidden before. But the hall of learning is not free from danger, for as the voice of the silence warns, beneath every flower of knowledge, a serpent of pride coils. It is easy to become intoxicated by learning, to mistake information for transformation, to let spiritual ambition become another mask for the ego. In this stage, the seeker risks replacing material vanity with intellectual vanity, swapping the pursuit of wealth or status for the pursuit of spiritual superiority. This is why many travelers on the path become stuck here. They accumulate books, teachings, techniques, but their hearts remain unchanged. They speak of unity, but live in division. They preach compassion, but secretly crave recognition. They meditate, but only to feel more special, more advanced, more enlightened. The serpent of pride tightens its grip. True learning, the ancient texts remind us, is not accumulation, but purification. It is not about knowing more, but about becoming less. Less arrogant, less reactive, less enslaved to self-image. It is about cultivating humility, patience, and above all, compassion. Only then does the third stage open. The Hall of Wisdom. Here, the seeker crosses a threshold. No longer do they walk for themselves. No longer do they seek to shine, to succeed, to rise above. They walk for the world. They act from a place beyond ego, beyond self-interest. Their life becomes a vehicle for something larger, for love, for service, for the unfolding of a greater harmony. In this hall, the distinction between self and other dissolves. The seeker no longer asks, "What can I gain?" They ask, "How can I serve?" They no longer see the world as a collection of separate beings and events, but as a living tapestry, each thread inseparably woven into the whole. This is the stage where the heresy of separateness is finally overcome. The illusion that I am here, you are there, and between us is emptiness, this illusion shatters. Instead, there is only the one, expressing itself through the many, playing out the cosmic dance through countless forms, and returning always to its own silent essence. But reaching this stage is not about escaping life. It is about penetrating life more deeply. It is not about withdrawing into caves or monasteries, but about meeting every moment, every person, every challenge, with the eyes of wisdom and the heart of compassion. It is about becoming a living bridge between the visible and the invisible, between the temporal and the eternal. Helena Blavatsky understood this journey not as an exotic philosophy, but as a universal map of human evolution. She taught that the goal of life is not self-perfection in isolation, but participation in the great work of lifting all beings. In the Hall of Wisdom, the individual becomes transparent to the light of the whole. Personal desires fall away. What remains is a quiet joy, a profound peace, a sense of being rooted in something vast and timeless. But here is the paradox. Even as the seeker ascends, they descend. Even as they reach the heights of wisdom, they return to serve those still in the depths. This is why, in Tibetan Buddhism, the highest ideal is the bodhisattva, the one who renounces final liberation, not out of attachment, but out of boundless compassion. The bodhisattva vows not to enter nirvana until all beings are free, not because they are trapped, but because they are free. Free from the illusion of separateness, free from the illusion of progress for the self alone, free to become the path, the light, the hand stretched back to lift another. As we reflect on these three halls, ignorance, learning, wisdom, we might ask ourselves, where am I now? What holds me back? What calls me forward? And most importantly, how can I walk this path not as a personal quest, but as part of the great journey of all beings? Because in the end, the voice of the silence does not speak only to the mind. It speaks to the soul. It calls us beyond words, beyond doctrines, beyond the need to be anything other than fully present, fully alive, fully human. And it reminds us that the path of awakening is not a ladder to climb, but a circle to complete. We begin in ignorance. We rise through learning. We return through wisdom. And we discover at last that we were never separate, never alone, never apart from the whole. We were and are the silence itself, the At the very heart of the voice of the silence lies a single, piercing idea, the heresy of separateness. Blavatsky did not use this phrase lightly. To her and to the Tibetan wisdom she transmitted, separateness is not just a mistake, it is the original wound. It is the deep illusion from which all other suffering flows. But what does this mean? In our daily lives, we are surrounded by the language and logic of separation. I am here, you are there. This is mine, that is yours. My success does not depend on your success, my suffering is my own. We build identities on separation. We define ourselves by what makes us different, our nationality, our religion, our wealth, our opinions, even our pain. We build entire systems, political, economic, social, on the assumption that competition is natural, that survival is individual, that to win means someone else must lose. But beneath this surface logic, something in us knows it is false. When we harm another, we feel a wound within ourselves. When we isolate, we feel the weight of loneliness. When we grasp for possessions, achievements, recognition, we feel the emptiness that no amount of acquisition can fill. The heresy of separateness is not just a metaphysical idea, it is an experience, a deep fracture in the human soul. According to Tibetan mysticism, this illusion is the root of all suffering. It is the veil that blinds us to our true nature. It is the voice that says, you are alone, you are cut off, you are not enough. And as long as we believe it, we remain trapped. Trapped in fear, in craving, in conflict. The voice of the silence offers a radical medicine. It says, drop the illusion. Not by force, not by denial, but by seeing through it. It invites us to recognize that every boundary is provisional, that the skin separating you from the world is not a wall, but a membrane, porous and alive, that your thoughts are not fully your own, but part of a larger current of consciousness, that your joys and sorrows are woven into the joys and sorrows of all beings. This does not mean erasing individuality. It does not mean dissolving into some vague, impersonal oneness. It means waking up to a deeper truth. That individuality exists within relationship, that the self is a node in the web of life, that to love oneself rightly is to love the world, and to love the world rightly is to love oneself. In practical terms, what does it mean to overcome separateness? It means recognizing that when you help another, you help yourself, that when you harm another, you harm yourself, that there is no private good, no isolated victory, no personal salvation. The Tibetan teachings remind us that enlightenment is not a private escape. It is a collective liberation. This is why the highest vow is not to ascend alone, but to lift all beings. This is why the Bodhisattva, even on the threshold of nirvana, turns back, not out of obligation, but out of love. The heresy of separateness crumbles when we begin to see with the eyes of the heart, when we understand that behind every face, there is the same light, when we feel that every pain in the world calls for our healing, when we recognize that every act of kindness ripples outward, reshaping the world in ways we cannot predict. But overcoming separateness is not only about others. It is also about how we relate to ourselves. We often fragment internally. We divide ourselves into parts, the parts we accept, the parts we reject, the parts we show, the parts we hide. We wage war inside our own minds, denying, repressing, judging, punishing. We create separateness within, and then wonder why we cannot find peace. The voice of the silence calls us to heal inwardly and outwardly, to gather the scattered pieces, to embrace the totality of who we are, to extend that same embrace outward, to the totality of life. This is not sentimental. It is rigorous. It requires patience, humility, courage. It requires that we look honestly at our patterns of grasping and avoidance, our habits of judgment and comparison. It requires that we learn to sit in the discomfort of uncertainty, vulnerability, loss. It requires that we choose again and again to act from connection, even when it is hard, even when it costs us, even when no one sees. Blavatsky understood that the heresy of separateness was not something we overcome once and for all. It is a lifelong practice. It is a path. It is the daily, moment-to-moment work of remembering that we belong, that we are part of something vast, intricate, alive, that our lives matter not because they are separate and special, but because they are threads in the great tapestry. There is a beautiful passage in the voice of the silence that says, "Abandon thy life if thou wouldst live." What does it mean to abandon life? Not to reject it, not to escape it, but to let go of the small self, the clinging ego, the tight grip of control and possession, to step into a larger life, a life animated by service, by compassion, by the quiet joy of knowing that we rise and fall together. This is the great paradox. When we cling to separateness, we diminish ourselves. When we release it, we expand. When we see only me and mine, we are poor. When we see the whole, we are rich beyond measure. This teaching is not abstract. It touches every part of life. How we listen, how we speak, how we eat, how we work, how we dream, how we forgive. It calls us to remember in each moment that we are not separate, that every breath we take is a gift from the world, that every step we take leaves an imprint on the world, that every choice we make shapes the world. The heresy of separateness is not an easy illusion to break. It is woven into our biology, our culture, our language, but it is not ultimate. It is not the deepest truth. And this is why teachings like the voice of the silence matter, because they remind us. They point us back. They hold up a mirror to the soul and they whisper, "You are not alone. You have never been alone. You are part of the whole. You are the whole. Beneath the surface of difference, there is unity. Beneath the noise of the many, there is the music of the one. And in that one, we find our home." Within the pages of The Voice of the Silence, Helena Blavatsky presents a profound map for the journey of the soul, a journey through what she calls the three halls: the hall of ignorance, the hall of instruction, and the hall of wisdom. These three symbolic spaces are not just ancient metaphors. They are reflections of stages every seeker will encounter, whether they know it or not. They describe where we are, where we long to go, and what stands in our way. Let us walk through each, not as distant observers, but as fellow travelers on this timeless path. The hall of ignorance is where most of humanity dwells. It is the domain of material life, of surface desires, of ego-driven ambition. Here, survival and pleasure rule. Here, life is measured by what can be possessed, controlled, or consumed. In the hall of ignorance, the mind is not silent. It chatters endlessly about wants, fears, comparisons. It seeks satisfaction in wealth, status, appearance, approval. And yet, beneath all this noise, there is a hunger that nothing external can fill. Blavatsky writes that in this hall, we are like wanderers lost in a desert, drinking from mirages, forever thirsty. But the hall of ignorance is not evil. It is a necessary stage. It is the soil from which longing grows. For many, it is the pain and disappointment of this hall that awakens the search for something more. we begin to sense that our lives are not only about accumulation. We begin to ask, who am I beyond what I own, beyond what I achieve? This is when the door to the next stage opens. The hall of instruction is where the seeker steps onto the path of knowledge. Here the mind turns inward. We begin to question the world, to study the nature of reality, to explore philosophy, spirituality, science, art. We become students. We read sacred texts. We meditate. We seek teachers. We gather insights. At first, this hall is exhilarating. There is a thrill in discovery, a joy in expanding the mind. But soon, a danger appears. Blavatsky warns that beneath every flower of knowledge, there coils a serpent of pride. The seeker begins to identify not just with possessions but with concepts, with being wise, with being advanced, with knowing more than others. The ego, once attached to material things, now attaches to spiritual things. This is the great trap of the hall of instruction. The danger is subtle. It masquerades as virtue. We may even convince ourselves that we are further along the path than we truly are. We may mistake words for wisdom, rituals for realization, complexity for depth. We may become so enamored with the idea of spiritual progress that we forget the actual work of transformation. This is why Blavatsky insists that the flowers of this hall must be handled with care. That knowledge without humility is a heavier chain than ignorance. That learning without love leads only to isolation. To pass beyond this stage, something profound must shift. The seeker must turn away from self-centered advancement and towards selfless service. They must stop asking, how can I rise? And begin asking, how can I lift others? This is when the hall of wisdom appears. The hall of wisdom is not entered by accumulating more. It is entered by surrendering. Here, the boundaries between self and other dissolve. The seeker becomes the servant. The knowledge once hoarded becomes a gift. The work once done for personal enlightenment becomes an offering for the healing of the whole. In this hall, one no longer acts from fear or desire. One acts from a quiet center, from a place of stillness that embraces all things. The hall of wisdom is not about perfection. It is not about escaping the world. It is about returning to the world, rooted in a deeper truth. A truth that sees every being as kin. A truth that recognizes that joy and sorrow, gain and loss, life and death are all part of a greater unfolding. This is the hall where compassion is no longer a feeling, but a way of being. Where humility is no longer an effort, but a natural state. Where love is no longer something we seek, but something we are. Blavatsky draws a powerful parallel between the three halls and the myth of the cave in Plato's philosophy. In Plato's cave, the prisoners sit in darkness, chained, watching shadows on a wall, believing them to be real. This is the hall of ignorance. One prisoner turns, struggles free, and begins the painful ascent out of the cave, into the light. This is the hall of instruction. Finally, emerging into the sunlight, he sees reality directly, not as appearances, but as truth. This is the hall of wisdom. But in both teachings, the journey does not end here. The awakened one must go back. Return to the cave. Return to the world. Not to preach superiority, but to serve, to guide, to help others awaken. This is the true test. Not how high you climb, but how deeply you serve. Not how much you know, but how much you love. Not how far you travel, but how fully you return. The three halls are not just stages we pass through once. They are cycles we repeat over and over at deeper levels. At every stage of life, we face ignorance, we seek instruction, we touch wisdom, and each time we are invited to let go a little more, to step more fully into the freedom that comes when we stop clinging to the small self and open to the vastness of life. So as we reflect on these teachings, let us ask ourselves, where am I now? Am I lost in the distractions of the world? Am I clinging to knowledge as identity? Am I stepping into the quiet joy of service? And most importantly, am I willing to keep walking? Because the path is never static. It is alive, unfolding, calling us onward. The three halls are not places on a map. They are mirrors for the soul. They show us where we are, and they invite us, always, to take the next step, not for our own sake alone, but for the sake of all. In the modern world, we are taught to avoid pain at all costs. We are surrounded by messages telling us that suffering is a failure, that discomfort is a problem to be fixed, that happiness is measured by how little we feel pain. But in the voice of the silence, and in the wisdom of the Tibetan tradition, pain is not seen as an enemy. Pain is seen as a teacher. Helena Blavatsky introduces the idea of sacred pain, a form of suffering that does not diminish the soul, but awakens it. She writes that before the soul can see, it must achieve harmony within. Before the eyes can open to truth, they must become blind to illusion. Before the heart can love purely, it must break. This is not romantic suffering. This is not the glorification of tragedy. This is the recognition that certain forms of pain are part of the alchemical fire that transforms the self. In Tibetan thought, suffering is divided. There is blind suffering, the kind born from ignorance, attachment, craving, and aversion. And there is intelligent suffering, the kind that arises when we begin to face truth, when we dare to break the shell of the ego, when we surrender to the larger rhythms of life. Intelligent suffering is not masochism. It is not self-punishment. It is the pain that comes from growth, from awakening, from the death of the false self. Imagine the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. The breaking of the cocoon is not comfortable, but it is necessary. Imagine the seed breaking open underground. The cracking of its shell is not destruction. It is emergence. We too must break open. We too must allow certain illusions, attachments, identities to die. And this dying will hurt. It will hurt because we have built our sense of safety on things that cannot last. It will hurt because we have confused who we are with what we have, with how we appear, with how others see us. It will hurt because the ego resists surrender with all its strength. But if we can stay present in that pain, if we can let it work upon us, it becomes sacred. It becomes the fire that purifies, not the fire that burns. Blavatsky speaks of allowing the tears of humanity to fall into your heart and not wiping them away until the suffering that caused them has been healed. This is the pain of compassion, the pain of caring deeply in a world that is wounded, the pain of opening oneself to the suffering of others, not to drown in it, but to become a vessel of healing. This is not easy. In a society that teaches us to numb, to distract, to move on quickly, to keep smiling, the call to sacred pain can feel overwhelming, but it is the path to real strength. Because when we refuse to face pain, we remain weak. We become controlled by fear. We avoid challenge. We avoid depth. We avoid life. When we face pain with courage, with intelligence, with an open heart, we become strong. Not hard, not closed, but resilient, compassionate, awake. The Buddhist tradition speaks of the bodhisattva, the one who has tasted freedom, but chooses to stay in the world of suffering to help others. This is the highest expression of intelligent suffering, to feel the pain of the world, not as a burden, but as a call, to walk into the fire, not to be consumed, but to become light. Sacred pain is not just about grand gestures. It is present in the small everyday choices. To tell the truth even when it costs you, to forgive even when it hurts, to hold space for another's sorrow even when you have your own, to keep showing up even when you feel tired, afraid, uncertain. Blavatsky reminds us that every act of love, every act of service, every act of courage requires sacrifice. Not the sacrifice of self-destruction, but the sacrifice of ego, of comfort, of the need to control. She reminds us that the path is not one of avoidance, but of transformation. We do not eliminate suffering by escaping it. We eliminate suffering by changing our relationship to it, by seeing it not as punishment but as passage, by allowing it to carve channels of depth within us, by letting it teach us humility, empathy, wisdom. There is a profound difference between pain that crushes and pain that opens. Pain that comes from resisting life will crush us. Pain that comes from aligning with life will open us. It will break the shell. It will let the light in. It will reveal the vastness that was always within. In the alchemical tradition, the phrase solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine, describes the process of inner transformation. First, the old form must dissolve. The ego, the persona, the masks must fall away. This is the dissolution. And yes, it hurts. Then from the raw material something new is born, a self not based on illusion, but on essence. A self not armored against the world, but transparent to the world. This is the recombination. This is the phoenix rising. This is the soul reborn. And this is why intelligent suffering is sacred. Because it is not the end of the story. It is the doorway. It is the crossing. It is the labor that brings forth new life. In our own lives, we can begin to recognize the difference. We can ask, is this pain leading me deeper into truth or deeper into illusion? Is it breaking me open or closing me down? Is it calling me to grow or tempting me to shrink? We can begin to meet our own suffering and the suffering of the world with a new gaze. Not cold detachment, not desperate fixing, but presence, compassion, wisdom. Blavatsky's voice of the silence is not a manual for avoiding pain. It is a song for walking through it and being changed. It is a call to remember that within every moment of loss, of grief, of letting go, there is a hidden promise. The promise of awakening. The promise of returning to what we truly are. The promise of discovering that beneath all our defenses, all our striving, all our separateness, we are already whole. We are already one. We are already home. The voice of the silence tells us that before the soul can hear, it must become deaf to the roaring of the world and the whispering of the ego. But what are these voices, these forces, that keep us trapped? They are the voices of desire, of fear, and of the illusion of control. Desire says, I need more. Fear says, I am not enough. Control says, I can make life bend to my will. Together, they form the prison of the ego. And most of us live inside this prison without even knowing it. Desire is not just wanting things. It is the restless hunger that says I will only be happy when I get the relationship, when I achieve the goal, when I have the success, the approval, the security. It is an endless chain. Because as soon as one desire is met, another appears. The voice of the silence warns us. Do not mistake the fires of desire for the sun of life. Do not let the glow of temporary pleasures blind you to the eternal light. Fear is the shadow twin of desire. If desire pulls us forward, fear holds us back. It whispers, you will lose what you love. You will fail. You will be hurt. You will be alone. Fear narrows our vision. It shrinks our world. It makes us cling to the familiar, even when the familiar suffocates us. It makes us stay small, even when life calls us to expand. And then there is control. The most subtle prison of all. The belief that if we just try hard enough, plan carefully enough, fight fiercely enough, we can master life. We can protect ourselves from pain. We can guarantee happiness. We can bend reality to our terms. But the deeper we go on the spiritual path, the more we see that control is an illusion. Life is not something we own. It is something we participate in. We are not masters of the universe. We are dancers in its great unfolding. The wisdom of the Tibetan tradition invites us to a radical shift, not to suppress desire or fear, not to fight control with more control, but to see through them, to recognize that they are not ultimate, to hold them lightly. This is the practice of what Blavatsky calls sacred indifference. Sacred indifference is not coldness or detachment. It is the ability to act fully, to love deeply, to care passionately, without being enslaved by the outcome. It is to do what is right, not because it will make us win, but because it is aligned with truth. It is to walk through the world with an open heart and empty hands. Empty of grasping, empty of clinging, empty of the illusion that we can possess what was never ours. There is a freedom in this, a freedom beyond success or failure, beyond gain or loss, beyond praise or blame. It is the freedom of the one who knows they are part of the whole, who knows that life is a gift, not a possession, who knows that the only thing worth holding on to is love. But how do we reach this freedom? Not by escaping life, but by going deeper into it, by noticing, moment by moment, the pull of desire, the grip of fear, the tightening of control, and by softening, by breathing, by remembering that we are not separate. Blavatsky writes that before the soul can see, it must achieve harmony. Harmony is not static. It is not standing still. It is the dynamic balance of a dancer. It is the ability to move with life, to bend and flow, to rise and fall, without losing the center. In practical terms, this means learning to meet each moment as it is. When joy comes, receive it. When sorrow comes, allow it. When challenge comes, face it. When letting go comes, surrender. Not with resignation, but with trust. Not as victims, but as participants. Not as controllers, but as co-creators. There is an old image in the Buddhist tradition of a man in a boat crossing a river. Halfway across, he realizes that the boat itself must be left behind, because the other shore is not a place. It is a state of being. The boat is desire. The boat is fear. The boat is control. They carry us for a time. They have their place. But eventually they must be set down. Otherwise, they become the weight that keeps us from crossing. Sacred indifference is not nihilism. It is not giving up on life. It is loving life so deeply that we stop trying to cage it. It is loving others so deeply that we stop trying to own them. It is loving ourselves so deeply that we stop trying to perfect the image and start tending to the soul. Blavatsky teaches that the real strength is not in domination, but in surrender. Not in armoring the heart, but in opening it. Not in clinging to certainty, but in embracing mystery. This is the art of living. To walk the edge between effort and release, between discipline and grace, between action and rest, between form and formlessness. In this dance, we discover a new kind of power, the power of presence, the power of authenticity, the power of being, fully and fearlessly, ourselves. Not the small self of the ego, but the vast self of the soul, the self that is not separate from the world, but woven into its very fabric. The self that knows that every breath is both a gift and a letting go, that every moment is both an arrival and a departure, that every life is both a wave and the ocean. When we live from this place, we are no longer bound by desire, fear, or control. We are no longer chasing or resisting. We are no longer trapped in the story of me and mine. We are free, free to love, free to serve, free to dance with life as it is. This is the invitation of the voice of the silence, not to escape the world, but to meet it with open eyes, open hands, and an open heart, to become the silence in the midst of the noise, the still point in the turning world, the light that shines, not to possess, but to give. In many traditions, compassion is seen as a virtue, a quality of the noble, the kind, the awakened. But in The Voice of the Silence, Helena Blavatsky goes further. She calls compassion not just a virtue, but the law of laws. Not an emotion, not an act, but the very foundation of existence. What does this mean? At first glance, compassion seems like a feeling. We think of it as tenderness toward suffering, a softening of the heart. But the Tibetan tradition speaks of compassion as something much deeper. It is the recognition of shared being, the felt knowledge that there is no separate self, that the pain of another is not apart from us, that when one suffers, all are touched. When one rises, all are lifted. This is why compassion is not optional on the spiritual path. It is not an add-on, it is the path itself. Blavatsky writes that without compassion, all wisdom turns to ashes. Without compassion, knowledge hardens into pride. Without compassion, power corrupts. Because without compassion, we have missed the essential truth, that life is one, that consciousness is a shared field, that the many are expressions of the one, and the one dances through the many. To awaken is to realize this, not just intellectually, but viscerally, to feel it in the bones, to breathe it, to live from it. Compassion is not pity. It is not looking down on another. It is standing beside them. It is recognizing their humanity as our own. It is seeing through their masks, their wounds, their defenses, and touching the place where we are the same. It is holding space for suffering without drowning in it. It is offering presence, not just solutions. It is acting not to fix from above, but to heal from within. The Bodhisattva ideal in Tibetan Buddhism captures this. The one who vows to postpone their own final liberation until all beings are free. Not because they are stuck, but because they are free. Free from the illusion that there is any such thing as personal liberation. Free from the idea that we can transcend alone. Free from the belief that our awakening is ours. The Bodhisattva sees that awakening is collective, that we rise together or not at all, that to turn away from the suffering of the world is to turn away from truth. Blavatsky calls us to this level of compassion. She calls us to let go of spiritual selfishness, to let go of the idea that we are here to perfect ourselves, to understand that we are here to participate in the healing of the whole. This does not mean taking on every burden. It does not mean collapsing under the weight of the world's pain. It means recognizing our part, our unique thread in the web, and showing up with presence, with humility, with love. Compassion transforms the way we see everything. It transforms how we see ourselves. We stop judging. We stop shaming. We stop dividing ourselves into good and bad, worthy and unworthy. We recognize that we too are human. We too are in process. We too are learning. We extend to ourselves the same tenderness we long to extend to others. We hold our own suffering with gentleness, not indulgence. We hold our own growth with patience, not pressure. And from this place we can offer something real to the world. Not perfection, not mastery, but presence. Compassion transforms how we see others. We stop reducing them to their behavior. We stop defining them by their wounds. We see the child behind the mask, the longing behind the anger, the tenderness behind the defenses. We meet them where they are, without abandoning where we are. We listen, we witness, we love. And sometimes that love takes the form of fierce truth. Sometimes it takes the form of soft silence. Sometimes it takes the form of simply staying. Compassion transforms how we see life itself. We stop fighting reality. We stop resenting imperfection. We stop demanding that things be other than they are. We open to the beauty and the tragedy, the joy and the grief, the light and the shadow. We recognize that everything belongs, not because everything is good, but because everything is part of the dance of growth, the dance of awakening, the dance of returning home. In this sense, compassion is the highest form of intelligence. It sees the whole. It holds the paradox. It acts wisely, tenderly without clinging to outcome. Blavatsky writes that compassion is the light of eternal justice, the balance of all things, the music of the eternal. It is the very fabric of the universe, and when we align with it, we align with life itself. This is not passive. This is not weakness. This is the greatest power, because it is the power that creates, sustains, and transforms. It is the power that dissolves illusion. It is the power that sets us free. So how do we practice this? How do we embody compassion in a world so fractured, so hurting, so fast? We begin here, now, with the person in front of us, with the part of ourselves that needs love, with the moment that calls for presence. We drop the story, we drop the judgment, we drop the rush, and we enter the silence that listens, the silence that holds, the silence that heals. Compassion is not something we achieve. It is something we remember, something we return to, something we uncover beneath the layers of fear, pride, and separation. It is who we are. It is what we are. It is the law of laws, the thread that runs through all things, the voice that calls us home. The Voice of the Silence is not a book meant to be admired on a shelf or quoted at spiritual gatherings. It is a map for living. Helena Blavatsky makes it clear, the real journey is not to read about the path, not to talk about the path, but to become the path. But what does it mean to become the path? It means that the teachings move from the head to the heart, from theory to practice, from inspiration to embodiment. It means we stop asking, how can I find the path, and start realizing I am the path. This realization is both liberating and humbling. Liberating because it removes the false idea that awakening is somewhere far away, locked in secret temples, accessible only to the chosen few. Humbling because it shows us that the real work is here, now, in the small moments, in the ordinary life, in the way we meet ourselves and others each day. To live the voice of the silence is to remember over and over again that spirituality is not an escape from life, but a way of entering it more fully. It is not about perfection, but presence. It is not about leaving the world, but about loving the world more deeply and wisely. Blavatsky speaks of the importance of harmonizing the inner and the outer. Before the soul can see, there must be inner harmony. Before the soul can hear, it must quiet the noise of desire and fear. Before the soul can speak, it must learn the language of truth. This is the lifelong work. Not the dramatic gestures, not the grand renunciations, but the quiet, steady refining of consciousness. Moment by moment, choice by choice, encounter by encounter. To become the path is to let each moment shape you. Let joy open you. Let sorrow soften you. Let challenge strengthen you. Let beauty inspire you. Let loss deepen you. It is to let life itself be the teacher, and to meet that teaching with humility and courage. Blavatsky warns of the danger of seeking spiritual shortcuts, of wanting transcendence without transformation, of wanting power without purity, of wanting insight without responsibility. She reminds us that the real path demands everything, not because it is cruel, but because it is honest. You cannot carry your old self into a new life. You cannot cling to the ego and enter unity. You cannot serve yourself and serve the whole. The path asks us to dissolve, to surrender, to die again and again to the false, so that the true may be born. This is why the path is not for the faint of heart. It is for those who are willing to be remade, not once, not twice, but continually. And yet, paradoxically, this remaking is also a return to what has always been, a return to the simple, naked, shining being that we are underneath the layers, a return to the heart of silence. Blavatsky uses the image of the pilgrim, the one who walks not for achievement, not for arrival, but for the sake of the walk itself, the one who understands that the path and the goal are one, that the way we walk is already the destination. To live as a pilgrim is to bring mindfulness to every step, to bring kindness to every encounter, to bring gratitude to every breath. It is to remember that each moment is a gate, each moment is a mirror, each moment is an invitation to wake up. When we walk this way, the world changes. Not because the outer circumstances necessarily shift, but because we meet them differently. We become less reactive, less rigid, less entangled in our own stories. We become more open, more responsive, more aligned. We begin to taste a freedom that is not dependent on conditions, a peace that is not the absence of pain, but the presence of depth, a joy that is not the thrill of acquisition, but the quiet glow of connection. This is the fruit of becoming the path. Not spiritual superiority, not cosmic rewards, but intimacy with life, intimacy with reality, intimacy with the heart. And from this intimacy, service flows, not as duty, not as sacrifice, but as natural expression. We serve because we see. We give because we are full. We love because we remember that we are one. Blavatsky writes that the highest act is to turn back to the world, to the suffering, to the forgotten. Not to preach, not to fix, not to save, but to stand as a presence of compassion, to become a light that reminds others of their own light, to become a silence that calls others into their own depths, to become a doorway through which others may glimpse the infinite. This is not grand. This is not dramatic. This is the quiet, steady radiance of a life aligned with truth. a life that knows its smallness and its vastness, a life that bows to the mystery. To live the teachings of the voice of the silence is to live as part of the great unfolding, to remember that we are threads in the vast tapestry, to trust that every act of love, every act of courage, every act of surrender ripples outward, reshaping the world in ways we may never see, and to walk on, not because we are certain, but because we are called by the whisper of the soul, called by the longing for home, called by the voice that is always speaking in the silence. There is a reason why Blavatsky named her work The Voice of the Silence. It is not the voice of a preacher, a scholar, or a guru. It is the voice that arises when all other voices fall away. It is the revolution that happens, not in the streets, not in politics, not in ideology, but in the unseen chambers of the human heart. A silent revolution. But do not mistake silence for weakness. Do not mistake stillness for passivity. The silence spoken of here is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of depth. It is the field from which all things arise. It is the space in which transformation becomes possible. In the modern world, we are drowning in noise. Noise of media, of opinions, of conflicts, of desires. Noise of our own minds, racing from thought to thought, distraction to distraction. And in this noise, we lose something essential. We lose the capacity to hear the subtle, to hear the true, to hear the call of the soul. Blavatsky reminds us that awakening does not come from adding more noise. It comes from entering the silence beneath it, from resting in the space where being is enough, where no performance is needed, no approval is required, no identity is defended. This is not easy. In fact, it may be the hardest thing, because to enter silence is to face ourselves, without the usual masks, without the usual escapes, without the usual stories that tell us who we are. Silence strips us bare. It confronts us with our longing, our fears, our attachments. It asks us to feel what we have avoided, to see what we have denied, to release what we have clung to. But if we stay with the discomfort, if we stay with the emptiness, if we stay long enough, something extraordinary happens. The emptiness becomes fullness. The silence becomes song. The nothingness becomes the doorway to everything. This is the paradox at the heart of all true paths, that we find by losing, that we rise by kneeling, that we become whole by breaking open, that we awaken by dying to the false. And in this awakening, we do not become someone special. We become no one. We become everyone. We become the space through which life flows, freely, joyfully, tenderly. Blavatsky calls this the dissolution of separateness, the moment when the drop realizes it is the ocean, the moment when the wave recognizes itself in every other wave, the moment when the self opens into the self, the vast, radiant field of being that holds all things. This is not a mystical escape. It is a radical return to the present, to the ordinary, to the miraculous woven into the everyday. It is the realization that every step, every breath, every glance, every word, every silence is part of the sacred dance. And once we see this, once we feel this, we are changed. Not necessarily an outward appearance, but an inward orientation. We move from grasping to giving, from reacting to responding, from fearing to trusting, from striving to surrendering. We become instruments of the silent revolution, not by preaching, not by converting, not by conquering, but by embodying, by becoming living questions, by becoming quiet lights, by becoming spaces where others can rest, remember, and reconnect. This is how the world changes, not only through systems, not only through movements, but through hearts, through the invisible transmissions of presence, of kindness, of truth, through the silent revolution. And here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to wait. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. You can begin now, where you are, with what you have, with the next breath, the next step, the next choice. Each small act of courage, of compassion, of honesty, of humility is part of it. Each time you choose love over fear, presence over distraction, service over self-interest, you are part of it. Each time you return to the silence, you are part of it. The silent revolution is already underway. It has been underway for centuries, for millennia, in monasteries and marketplaces, in palaces and prisons, in forests and cities, in known saints and unknown souls. And now, it is calling you, not to escape, but to enter, not to rise above, but to rise within, not to conquer the world, but to open to it, fully, tenderly, wisely. Blavatsky's voice joins the chorus of mystics, sages, poets, and prophets across time, all pointing to the same truth. The kingdom of heaven is within. The nirvana you seek is here. The beloved you long for is your own being. The silence is speaking. Are you listening? We have traveled through the teachings of the voice of the silence, across the three halls, through the heresy of separateness, the power of compassion, the sacredness of pain, and the deep invitation to become the path. But at the end of all these words, we return to one truth. The real journey is not in the text. It is in you. It is in the quiet moments when no one is watching. It is in the way you meet yourself, your neighbor, the stranger, the earth. It is in the courage to stay present when it would be easier to run, in the softness to forgive when it would be easier to harden, in the willingness to listen when it would be easier to speak. The voice of the silence is not something you master. It is something you practice. A living invitation to walk more lightly, more deeply, more lovingly through the world. So as we close this exploration, I leave you with a question. What is one small way you can bring more presence, more compassion, more silence into your life today? Not as an idea, but as an action. Not as an achievement, but as a gift. Thank you for walking this path with us. If you found value in this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with anyone who might need these reflections. Your support helps us keep creating meaningful content and reaching more souls on their own journeys. And if you want to dive even deeper, explore the other videos on this channel. Each one is crafted to accompany you in your own awakening, step by step, breath by breath. Until next time, may you walk in peace, in wisdom, and in the quiet power of the silence within.